Catherine stunned everyone at the palace yesterday. The Princess of Wales, known for her composed and graceful demeanor, sent an unexpected message to Princess Anne that left hardened royal staff members weeping openly. Those who witnessed the exchange described it as raw and impossibly moving. Sources say Catherine's words came from a place of deep emotion, acknowledging Anne's quiet sacrifices and steady presence during Catherine's darkest hours. "I couldn't have survived this without you," she confessed. But what exactly has Catherine been enduring that would bring her to such a vulnerable moment? The truth is more heartbreaking than anyone imagined. The weight of the crown. The autumn leaves had begun their descent across the Windsor estate when Catherine, Princess of Wales, sat down to compose what would become one of the most emotionally charged letters ever exchanged between members of the modern royal family. It was late November 2024, and the golden afternoon light filtered through the windows of her private study at Adelaide Cottage, casting long shadows across the desk where she'd placed a simple piece of cream stationery bearing her personal monogram. Just weeks earlier, Catherine had stood before cameras to announce the completion of her chemotherapy treatment, her voice steady but her eyes betraying the profound journey she'd undertaken through the darkest months of her life. The public had seen glimpses of her struggle, carefully curated photographs, brief video messages, the occasional appearance that spoke volumes through what was left unsaid. But what they hadn't seen was the woman behind the title, the mother who'd held her children close while fighting an invisible battle, the wife who'd leaned on William's shoulder in moments when the weight of it all threatened to crush her spirit. Catherine had always understood that joining the royal family meant accepting a life of service, of putting duty before personal comfort, of smiling through pain and standing tall when every fiber of her being wanted to crumble. But understanding something intellectually and living it through every cell of your body are vastly different experiences. The cancer diagnosis in early 2024 had stripped away any remaining illusions about the cost of wearing a crown, even one that wouldn't officially rest on her head for years to come. As she contemplated the blank page before her, Catherine's thoughts turned to the one woman in the family who had truly understood what she'd been through. Not the illness itself, but the peculiar torture of facing a personal crisis while the entire world watched, commented, and speculated. Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, had spent more than 5 decades navigating the impossible balance between private suffering and public duty, and she'd done so with a grace and determination that had earned her a reputation as the hardest-working member of the firm. Anne had completed over 500 engagements in 2023 alone, a staggering number that put younger royals to shame. At 74 years old, she showed no signs of slowing down, approaching each ribbon-cutting, charity visit, and state function with the same no-nonsense efficiency she'd brought to royal life since she was barely out of her teens. She was the daughter who never sought the spotlight but somehow commanded respect through sheer force of competence and an almost military precision in her duties. But Catherine had come to see beyond the stern exterior, beyond the woman who the press had sometimes portrayed as cold or unapproachable. She'd witnessed Anne's kindness in small, private moments, the way she'd quietly checked in during Catherine's early days as a royal bride, the practical advice delivered without fanfare, the understanding nods across crowded rooms when protocol demanded smiles, but circumstances warranted tears. The two women were separated by nearly 3 decades in age, by vastly different upbringings, by the kind of life experiences that should have created an unbridgeable gap. Anne had been born into royalty, raised from birth to understand her position and responsibilities. Catherine had grown up in Berkshire, the daughter of self-made entrepreneurs, her childhood one of relative normalcy before fate, and a university romance with Prince William altered the entire trajectory of her life. Yet somewhere along the way, these two women had found common ground. They'd both married military men who understood duty. They'd both been criticized by the press, Anne for being too serious, Catherine for being too perfect. They'd both learned to armor themselves against public opinion while remaining somehow vulnerable to the opinions of those they loved. They'd both discovered that being a royal woman meant walking a tightrope where every step was scrutinized, where showing too much emotion made you weak, but showing too little made you cold. The parallel challenges they faced had become even more apparent during Catherine's illness. While Catherine had fought her private battle, Anne had quietly increased her own workload, stepping in to cover engagements, representing the family at events that couldn't be postponed, doing what she'd always done, serving without complaint, working without recognition, holding the institution steady when others couldn't. Catherine picked up her pen, and as she began to write, she felt the words flow from a place deeper than protocol or propriety. This wasn't going to be a formal note of thanks or a dutiful acknowledgement of support. This was going to be something raw, something real, something that captured the profound gratitude she felt for a woman who had shown her what true strength looked like when the world demanded you keep standing even when your legs wanted to give way. A bond forged in duty. The relationship between Catherine and Princess Anne hadn't begun with warmth or immediate connection. In fact, their first interactions had been marked by a cautious formality that both women understood was necessary when navigating the treacherous waters of royal family dynamics. It was 2010, and Catherine was still simply Kate Middleton, the young woman who'd captured Prince William's heart at St. Andrews University and had somehow weathered the brutal scrutiny that came with dating the future king. Anne had watched from a distance as this middle-class girl was dissected by the press, her family investigated, her every outfit analyzed, her suitability for royal life debated in newspapers and on television programs. The Princess Royal had seen it all before, of course. She'd witnessed the media frenzy around Diana, the fairy tale that had curdled into tragedy, and she'd developed a healthy skepticism about outsiders who thought they understood what royal life entailed. But there was something different about Catherine. She didn't rush toward the spotlight or seek to change the institution from within. She moved carefully, deliberately, spending nearly a decade in the relationship before the engagement was announced on November 2010. Anne, who valued patience and pragmatism above all else, noticed this restraint. She noticed how Catherine never spoke out of turn, never courted controversy, never seemed to believe that her presence entitled her to remake the monarchy in her image. The wedding in April 2011 had been Anne's first opportunity to observe Catherine in her new role as the Duchess of Cambridge. While the world focused on the dress, the kiss on the balcony, the pageantry of it all, Anne had watched how Catherine handled the pressure, how she'd remained composed through a ceremony broadcast to billions, how she'd remembered every bit of protocol that had been drilled into her during the months of preparation. In the years that followed, Anne became what palace insiders would later describe as Catherine's secret weapon. The mentorship wasn't formal or announced. Anne would have bristled at anything so presumptuous, but it was real nonetheless. It happened in quiet conversations at family gatherings, in the advice delivered while walking together at Sandringham during Christmas, in the example Anne set simply by showing up and doing the work year after year without complaint or fanfare. Catherine learned from Anne what the history books and protocol officers couldn't teach. She learned that royal duty wasn't about grand gestures or emotional speeches. It was about showing up on the rainy Tuesday in November to open a community center that no one would remember next week. It was about making the 100th person you'd shaken hands with that day feel like the first. It was about finding meaning in the repetition, about understanding that consistency itself was a form of service. Anne taught Catherine, through action more than words, how to maintain boundaries with the press without appearing hostile, how to work with charities effectively rather than just lending your name to causes, how to balance family life with public duties in a way that protected your children while still fulfilling your obligations, how to weather criticism without internalizing it, without letting it change who you were at your core. But perhaps most importantly, Anne helped Catherine understand what it meant to be an outsider who became an insider. Because despite being born a princess, despite her royal blood and her upbringing, Anne had also experienced the particular pain of never quite fitting the mold others expected. She'd been criticized for being too masculine, too sporty, too serious. She'd been compared unfavorably to her more glamorous sister-in-law, Diana. She'd been mocked for her fashion choices and her perceived lack of warmth. Anne had married Mark Phillips in 1973, a commoner who'd served in the military, and she'd watched as her marriage eventually crumbled under the pressure of royal life and personal incompatibility. She'd divorced in 1992 and remarried that same year to Timothy Lawrence, another military man, another commoner, in a quiet ceremony that stood in stark contrast to her first wedding's pomp. She understood what it meant to have your private life dissected, to have your choices questioned, to be told you were doing it wrong even when you were doing your best. Catherine had married into the family in an era of 24-hour news cycles and social media, where every moment could be captured, edited, and distributed within seconds. But the fundamental challenge remained the same. How do you maintain your sense of self when you're expected to become an institution? How do you stay grounded when you're elevated to a pedestal? How do you remain human when you're treated as a symbol? The bond between them deepened after Catherine became a mother. When Prince George was born in July 2013, followed by Princess Charlotte in May 2015 and Prince Louis in April 2018, Anne became an unexpected source of practical wisdom. She'd raised 2 children, Peter and Zara, while maintaining a full schedule of royal duties. And she'd done so with the conviction that her children should have as normal a life as possible within the constraints of their position. Anne had refused titles for her children, a decision that had been controversial at the time but which had allowed Peter and Zara to forge their own paths outside the direct glare of royal expectation. Catherine couldn't make the same choice. Her children were direct heirs to the throne, but she absorbed the principle behind Anne's decision. Protect them. Let them be children. Don't sacrifice their well-being on the altar of public interest. The 2 women discovered they shared a fundamental philosophy about royal duty. It wasn't about glamour or celebrity or accumulating social media followers. It was about service in its truest, most unglamorous form. It was about honoring commitments even when you didn't feel like it. It was about representing something larger than yourself without losing yourself in the process. It was about finding dignity in the work itself rather than in the recognition it might bring. As the years passed, palace staff began to notice the subtle shift in their dynamic. Anne would arrive at family gatherings and seek Catherine out, the 2 of them often found in deep conversation away from the larger group. At official events, they'd exchange knowing glances across crowded rooms, a private language of understanding that spoke to shared experiences. When William and Catherine moved to Windsor in 2022, bringing them geographically closer to Anne's residence at Gatcombe Park in Gloucestershire, the opportunities for connection increased. But it was Catherine's cancer diagnosis that would truly reveal the depth of their bond. When Catherine had to step back from public duties in early 2024, when she was facing the frightening unknown of treatment and recovery, Anne had been one of the first to reach out. Not with flowers or public statements of support, but with something more valuable. Her presence, her experience, her quiet assurance that it was possible to face the darkness and emerge on the other side. Anne had increased her already grueling schedule to help cover for Catherine's absence, never once complaining or drawing attention to the extra burden she'd shouldered. She'd checked in regularly, not with pity, but with the practical concern of someone who understood that what Catherine wanted wasn't sympathy but solidarity. She'd reminded Catherine that taking time to heal wasn't a betrayal of duty. It was a necessary act of self-preservation that would allow her to serve more effectively in the future. The message that changed everything. Catherine's hand trembled slightly as she sealed the envelope, though not from weakness. The chemotherapy had ended in September 2024, and by late November her strength had largely returned. The trembling came from something else entirely, from the vulnerability of what she'd just written, from the rawness of emotions she'd poured onto those pages, from the knowledge that she was about to share parts of herself that even those closest to her rarely glimpsed. The letter had taken hours to compose, though Catherine had been mentally drafting it for weeks. It began simply enough, with gratitude for Anne's support during the darkest months of her life. But as Catherine wrote, something had shifted. The words became less about thanking Anne for specific actions and more about expressing something profound about what their relationship had come to mean, about what Anne had taught her without ever sitting her down for formal lessons. Palace sources who were privy to the letter's contents, though not its exact wording, which both women agreed would remain private, later described it as extraordinarily moving. Catherine had written about fear, about the nights when she'd wondered if she'd see her children grow up, about the guilt of being absent from royal duties when so many people depended on the institution's stability. She'd written about watching Anne continue to work tirelessly while she recovered, about the quiet inspiration that provided, about understanding finally and fully what it meant to embody duty, not as a burden, but as a calling. But the heart of the letter focused on something deeper. Catherine had written about the loneliness that sometimes accompanied royal life, about the peculiar isolation of being constantly surrounded by people yet unable to truly confide in most of them. She'd written about how Anne had shown her it was possible to maintain your integrity in a system that sometimes demanded you compromise it, to stay true to yourself while serving something larger than yourself. Catherine had expressed gratitude not just for Anne's presence during her illness, but for the years of quiet mentorship that had prepared her for this moment. She thanked Anne for teaching her that strength wasn't about never falling apart. It was about knowing how to put yourself back together and keep moving forward. She thanked her for demonstrating that you could be both vulnerable and resilient, both private and present, both human and royal. The letter reached Anne at Gatcombe Park on a gray November afternoon. She'd returned from a day of engagements, a visit to a rural hospital followed by a charity dinner, and found the envelope waiting on the silver tray in her study, where personal correspondence was placed. She recognized Catherine's handwriting immediately, and set aside the other letters to open it first. What happened next was witnessed by only Anne's private secretary, who had remained in the room to discuss the following week's schedule. As Anne read, her typically composed expression shifted. Her jaw tightened in the way it did when she was fighting emotion. Her eyes, which the public so often saw as stern and unyielding, filled with tears that she didn't bother to hide. By the time she finished reading, those tears had spilled over, leaving tracks down her cheeks that she wiped away impatiently, almost annoyed at her own emotional response. Anne read the letter twice, then a third time before carefully folding it and placing it in her desk drawer. Her secretary, who had discreetly looked away during this display of emotion, was stunned. In decades of service to the Princess Royal, she had never seen Anne cry. Not at funerals, not during personal crises, not even when discussing matters that clearly affected her deeply. Anne simply didn't do public displays of emotion, viewing them as a form of self-indulgence that duty-bound royals couldn't afford. But Catherine's words had broken through that armor. They'd touched something in Anne that she'd perhaps thought was too calloused by years of service to still feel so acutely, the recognition of what she'd given, not just during Catherine's illness, but over the years of quiet mentorship, moved her profoundly. More than that, the realization that her example had mattered, that her way of approaching royal duty had genuinely helped shape the woman who would one day be queen, validated choices and sacrifices that Anne had sometimes wondered about. The secretary later confided to a trusted colleague that Anne had sat in silence for several minutes after reading the letter, staring out the window at the darkening grounds of Gatcombe Park. When she finally spoke, it was to say something that revealed just how deeply the message had affected her. She said that in all her years of service, through all the engagements and events and endless obligations, she had sometimes wondered if any of it truly mattered beyond the immediate moment. Catherine's letter had answered that question. Word of Anne's reaction spread quickly through the tight-knit circle of senior palace staff, though the letter's contents remained protected. Those who heard about it were moved not just by what Catherine had written, but by what it had meant to Anne. The Princess Royal, so often portrayed as impervious to sentiment, had been touched in a way that revealed her humanity to those who served her. But the exchange resonated deeply for another reason. It represented a passing of the torch, in a sense, not of position or rank, but of understanding. Anne had spent 50 years demonstrating what royal duty looked like when stripped of ego and expectation. She'd shown that you could serve without seeking glory, work without demanding recognition, give without needing validation. And now, in Catherine, She saw someone who had absorbed those lessons and would carry them forward into the monarchy's next chapter. The letter also revealed something important about the evolution of the royal family itself. This wasn't the rigid, emotionally distant institution of previous generations. This was a family learning to acknowledge feelings while maintaining dignity, to express gratitude while preserving boundaries, to honor both tradition and genuine human connection. Catherine and Anne's exchange embodied a new possibility, that you could be both professional and personal, both royal and real. Echoes of Diana's legacy. The comparison was inevitable, though neither Catherine nor Anne would have welcomed it. Diana, Princess of Wales, cast a long shadow over the monarchy even decades after her death in August 1997. Her influence on how the public perceived the royal family, on what they expected from its members, remained profound. And Catherine, as William's wife and the woman who would one day hold the title Diana never got to claim, lived constantly with the ghost of her predecessor. But what made Catherine's relationship with Anne so significant was precisely how different it was from Diana's experience. Diana had entered the royal family at 19, barely more than a child herself, with little preparation for the role she was expected to play. She'd been chosen partly for her youth and malleability, for what the institution believed would be her willingness to be shaped into whatever the monarchy wanted her to be. Anne had watched that marriage from the beginning, had witnessed her brother Charles wed this young girl in the spectacle at St. Paul's Cathedral in July 1981. She'd seen the warning signs that others had missed or ignored, the mismatch in age and experience, the lack of genuine compatibility, the impossible expectations placed on someone so unprepared for the scrutiny that came with marrying the heir to the throne. Anne's relationship with Diana had been complicated, marked by mutual wariness and fundamental differences in how they approached royal life. Diana had been emotional, tactile, willing to break protocol if it meant connecting with people. Anne was reserved, formal, committed to maintaining the boundaries she believed royal duty mandated. Diana had courted the media's attention, understanding instinctively how to use her image to advance her causes. Anne had actively avoided such tactics, viewing them as manipulation unbecoming of serious royals. The tension between them had been palpable at family gatherings, though both women remained outwardly civil. Anne had privately questioned Diana's methods, her tendency toward emotional displays, her willingness to discuss her struggles publicly. Diana, in turn, had felt judged by Anne, had experienced the Princess Royal's reserve as coldness, had bristled at what she perceived as Anne's implicit criticism of her more modern approach to royal duties. But beneath the tension had been something else, a missed opportunity for understanding. Both women had, in their own ways, struggled with the constraints of royal life. Both had experienced unhappy marriages that ended in divorce. Both had dealt with media scrutiny that veered into cruelty. Both had tried to carve out spaces where they could be themselves, rather than simply playing their assigned roles. The tragedy of Diana's death had forced Anne, like everyone in the family, to reconsider her judgments. In the years that followed, as the full extent of Diana's struggles became public knowledge, Anne had privately acknowledged that perhaps she'd been too harsh, too quick to dismiss Diana's pain as histrionics rather than recognizing it as genuine suffering. She'd come to see that Diana's emotional approach, while different from her own, had connected with people in ways that traditional royal reserve never could, which made Anne's relationship with Catherine all the more meaningful. Catherine represented a synthesis of approaches. She had Diana's warmth and accessibility, her genuine connection with ordinary people, her understanding that the monarchy wanted to evolve to remain relevant. But she also embodied the discretion and dedication to duty that Anne had always valued, the commitment to serving without seeking personal glory, the respect for institutional stability. Catherine had studied Diana carefully, had learned from both her triumphs and her tragedies. She understood that Diana's greatest strength, her emotional authenticity, had also been her vulnerability in a system that often punished such openness. Catherine had found a different path, one that allowed her to be warm without being seen as weak, accessible without being exploited, human without sacrificing the dignity her position mandated. William had watched his wife forge this relationship with his aunt with profound gratitude and quiet pride. He remembered the tension between Diana and Anne, the way family gatherings had sometimes felt like navigating a minefield of old resentments and unspoken criticisms. Seeing Catherine and Anne develop genuine mutual respect and affection had healed something in him that he perhaps hadn't even realized wanted healing. William had inherited his mother's emotional intelligence and his father's sense of duty, and he'd long struggled to reconcile these seemingly contradictory inheritances. In Catherine, he'd found someone who embodied that reconciliation naturally, who understood that you could honor tradition while embracing change, that you could be both feelings and steadfast. Catherine's letter to Anne represented in William's eyes the kind of relationship his mother might have had with his aunt if circumstances had been different, if both women had been able to see past their differences to recognize their common ground. It was a form of healing not just for Catherine and Anne, but for the entire family, proof that the wounds of the past didn't have to define the future. The exchange also highlighted how Catherine had consciously chosen to learn from all the women who'd come before her, not just Diana, but also the Queen, Camilla, and Anne. Each had something to teach about surviving and thriving in a role that demanded everything, while offering precious little privacy or personal freedom. Catherine had absorbed these lessons without losing herself in the process, had found her own voice while respecting the institution she'd married into. Anne's emotional response to Catherine's letter suggested that she too found healing in their bond. Perhaps she saw in Catherine's success a validation that there were multiple ways to be an effective royal, that Diana's approach and her own approach weren't mutually exclusive, but could be integrated into something more complete. Perhaps she felt, in some small way, that she was helping Catherine avoid the pitfalls that had trapped Diana, that this time the institution wouldn't break the woman who'd married into it. The ripple effect through the palace. The news of Catherine's letter and Anne's emotional response traveled through palace corridors with remarkable speed, though details remained carefully guarded. Senior staff members who'd served the royal family for decades found themselves unexpectedly moved by what the exchange represented. These were people who prided themselves on professional detachment, who'd witnessed countless intimate family moments while maintaining appropriate boundaries, who'd learned long ago not to let the emotional lives of their employers affect them too deeply. Yet something about this particular moment broke through their carefully constructed reserve. A lady-in-waiting who'd served Anne for over 20 years confided to a colleague that she'd never seen the Princess Royal so visibly affected by anything. A private secretary at Kensington Palace who'd worked with Catherine since her early days as Duchess of Cambridge remarked that the Princess of Wales had seemed lighter somehow after sending the letter, as if she'd released something she'd been carrying for months. The staff's emotional response wasn't simply about witnessing two royals exchange kind words. They'd seen plenty of formal thank you notes and dutiful expressions of gratitude over the years. What moved them was the authenticity of the connection, the sense that these two women had broken through the layers of protocol and position to reach something genuine and human. In an institution often criticized for its coldness and emotional rigidity, Catherine and Anne had demonstrated that genuine warmth and deep feeling could coexist with duty and dignity. More than that, the exchange represented a shift in how the royal family functioned internally. For generations, the institution had operated on a model of emotional suppression. Feelings were private matters to be managed discreetly, never acknowledged openly, certainly never expressed in ways that might be perceived as vulnerable or needy. The stiff upper lip wasn't just a cultural stereotype. It was a survival mechanism in a world where showing weakness could be exploited by the press, by political enemies, by anyone seeking to undermine the monarchy's authority. Anne's willingness to receive such vulnerability without dismissing it as weakness showed that even the old guard could adapt, could recognize that the monarchy's survival might depend on its ability to be both traditional and emotionally intelligent. King Charles had been made aware of the exchange, though he respected both women's privacy too much to inquire about specific details. But those close to him noted his quiet satisfaction at the bond developing between his wife-to-be and his only sister. Charles had spent his life trying to modernize the monarchy while respecting its traditions, and he understood that relationships like the one between Catherine and Anne were crucial to that balancing act. Charles had witnessed firsthand how damaging it could be when family members failed to support each other. His own marriage to Diana had suffered partly because she'd felt isolated within the family, unable to find allies who truly understood her struggles. He'd watched his sons deal with the aftermath of their mother's death, had seen how family discord played out in tabloid headlines and public opinion polls. Now, as king, Charles was determined to foster a more united family structure. He'd worked to repair his relationship with Harry, though distance and differing visions for royal life had complicated those efforts. He'd supported William and Catherine's decision to raise their children with more normalcy than previous generations had enjoyed. The impact of Catherine and Anne's relationship extended beyond the senior royals to the younger generation as well. Princess Charlotte, at 9 years old, was already showing signs of her mother's diplomatic grace and her great-aunt's determination. She'd spent time with Anne at various family gatherings, and palace insiders noted how the young princess seemed to gravitate toward her great-aunt's no-nonsense approach to life. Charlotte had been deeply affected by her mother's illness, though Catherine and William had worked hard to shield all 3 children from the full weight of worry. The ripple effects extended to other family members as well. Queen Camilla, who'd developed her own close relationship with Anne over the years, saw in Catherine and Anne's bond a reflection of the support system she'd wanted when navigating her own complicated entrance into the royal family. Camilla had faced brutal public criticism for years, had been vilified as the woman who'd broken up Charles and Diana's marriage, and had slowly, patiently rebuilt her reputation through dedicated service and genuine warmth. Camilla understood what it meant to need an ally within the family who didn't judge you for past choices or hold your mistakes against you indefinitely. She'd found that in Anne, whose pragmatic acceptance of Camilla as Charles's chosen partner had meant more than effusive public defenses ever could. Seeing Catherine now receive similar support from Anne felt like a validation of the bond Camilla herself had found. The palace staff's emotional response to Catherine and Anne's exchange ultimately reflected something larger than admiration for 2 individuals. It represented hope that the institution they served was capable of growth and change, that it could honor its traditions while embracing more authentic human connections. For people who dedicated their careers to supporting the monarchy, seeing evidence that it could adapt and evolve was profoundly reassuring. A new chapter for the monarchy. As 2024 drew to a close and the royal family looked ahead to 2025, the relationship between Catherine and Princess Anne had become emblematic of a broader transformation within the monarchy. The institution that had once prided itself on emotional restraint and rigid hierarchy was learning to balance tradition with authentic human connection, duty with compassion, public service with private support. Catherine's journey from middle-class girl to future queen had been watched and documented obsessively, but her real education in royal life had happened away from cameras, in conversations with women like Anne who understood the peculiar challenges of their position. The letter she'd written wasn't just a personal expression of gratitude, it was evidence of a support system functioning as it should, of experienced royals mentoring newer ones, not through formal instruction, but through genuine relationship. The significance of this evolution cannot be overstated. The British monarchy's survival has always depended on its ability to adapt to changing social expectations while maintaining enough continuity to justify its existence. In the 21st century, that balance had become increasingly difficult to strike. The public wanted royals who were relatable and emotionally accessible, but they also wanted them to embody dignity and gravitas. They wanted transparency about personal struggles, but they also wanted mystery and grandeur. Catherine had somehow managed to walk this tightrope, and Anne had helped her learn how. Together they represented 2 generations of royal women who'd found ways to serve effectively while maintaining their integrity. Their bond suggested that the monarchy's future might be brighter than skeptics predicted, that it could evolve without losing its essential character. Catherine's growing influence within the family was undeniable. She'd entered the institution cautiously, spending years observing and learning before asserting herself. But her battle with cancer had crystallized something in her, a deeper understanding of what mattered, a willingness to prioritize authentic connection over performative duty, a recognition that she had valuable perspectives to contribute. Palace insiders noted that Catherine had become more confident in expressing opinions about family matters, more willing to advocate for changes she believed would benefit the institution. She'd pushed for greater privacy for her children, for more flexible approaches to royal engagements that allowed for genuine interaction rather than just photo opportunities, for charitable work that went deeper than ceremonial appearances. Anne, far from feeling threatened by Catherine's growing influence, had actively encouraged it. At 74, the Princess Royal showed no signs of retiring, but she understood that the monarchy's future rested with William and Catherine's generation. Rather than clinging to outdated methods or resisting change, Anne had chosen to support the evolution she saw as necessary for the institution's survival. This collaboration between generations was exactly what the monarchy wanted. Anne brought decades of experience, an encyclopedic knowledge of protocol, and credibility with traditionalists who might otherwise resist change. Catherine brought fresh perspectives, an intuitive understanding of public sentiment, and the ability to connect with younger generations who viewed the monarchy with skepticism. Together, they were helping to redefine what it meant to be a royal woman in the modern era. Gone was the expectation that royal women should be decorative accessories to their husbands, or that they should silently accept whatever role was assigned to them. Catherine and Anne, in their different ways, had demonstrated that royal women could be powerful in their own right, not through dramatics or rebellion, but through competence, dedication, and genuine service. The strength they'd found in female solidarity within the institution was transforming not just their own experiences, but the opportunities available to younger royal women. Princess Charlotte was growing up in a family where her mother and great-aunt modeled what purposeful, dignified royal service looked like. She would never question whether women could be as effective and respected as men in royal roles, because she was watching it proven every day. But the Catherine-Anne bond also had implications for the men in the family. William had seen how his wife had thrived with Anne's mentorship, and it had made him more aware of the importance of supporting systems within the family. He'd become more intentional about fostering connections between family members, about breaking down the silos that had sometimes isolated royals from each other in previous generations. King Charles II had taken note. He'd begun having more regular private conversations with Anne, seeking her counsel on family matters and institutional decisions. Charles had always respected his sister's judgment, but their relationship had sometimes been complicated by sibling dynamics and differing approaches to royal life. Now, in their 70s, they'd found a new appreciation for each other's strengths. The monarchy that would emerge from this period of transition would be different from what came before, but the changes weren't revolutionary. They were evolutionary. The core purpose remained the same: service to the nation, stability in times of change, symbolic unity in a diverse society. But the methods were adapting. The human dimension was being acknowledged, the emotional intelligence that had sometimes been lacking was being cultivated. Looking forward, Catherine and Anne's partnership suggested a model for how the monarchy might navigate the challenges ahead. There would be controversies and crises. There always were. There would be moments when the institution's relevance was questioned, when its costs were scrutinized, when its traditions seemed out of step with contemporary values. But if the family could maintain the kind of genuine support and understanding that Catherine and Anne had found, if they could continue to balance tradition with adaptation, dignity with accessibility, duty with humanity, then perhaps the monarchy could endure for another generation and beyond. Catherine understood that her role was still being defined, that she had decades ahead of her to shape what it meant to be queen in the 21st century. She wouldn't be another Diana. No one could be, and trying would be a mistake. She wouldn't be another Anne either, though she'd absorbed crucial lessons from the Princess Royal. She would be herself, drawing on the wisdom of those who came before while forging her own path. Anne, for her part, had found unexpected fulfillment in this mentorship role. After 5 decades of service, she might have been forgiven for growing cynical or tired, for questioning whether any of it had mattered. But Catherine's letter had shown her that her example had shaped the woman who would one day be queen, that her years of unglamorous, consistent service had laid groundwork for the monarchy's future. The emotional message that had left palace staff in tears was ultimately about more than 2 women expressing mutual appreciation. It was about the possibility of growth and connection within an institution often perceived as rigid and cold. It was about the power of mentorship and the importance of supporting each other through life's inevitable challenges. It was about finding strength in solidarity rather than isolation. As the royal family gathered for Christmas at Sandringham in late December 2024, there was a sense of cautious optimism about the year ahead.